People rarely notice the quiet ones. The man who walks in alone, the one who doesn't order much, the one in a faded hoodie, head down, eyes scanning the floor more than the menu. They don't ask why he came or what he's running from. They just guess. That night, when Eliot Maddox pushed open the smudged glass doors of Harvest Table's Branch 13, no one recognized him. Not the cashier, not the servers, not even Mara, the tired manager with eyes glued to the inventory sheet. But that was exactly how he wanted it. He wore an oversized hoodie pulled low, a baseball cap casting a shadow over his face. His designer shoes were swapped for worn sneakers, his wrist bare of the Rolex he once wore with pride. No business card, no suit, just him, Frank L., a stranger with nothing but a quiet presence and a name borrowed from his middle initial. He could have sent someone else to inspect this place, but something told him to come himself. The tray in his hand trembled slightly as he passed through the buffet line. Not from hunger, but from the memory of what this moment used to mean. Because 14 years ago, he had stood on the other side of that sneeze guard, pretending not to care if the food ran out before his turn. Tonight, he made it to the end of the line, but someone else didn't. Near the exit, an elderly man in layered clothes waited patiently, his hands wrinkled, his eyes dim. His smell made people step away. His presence made Chad, a sharp-jawed server, wrinkle his nose with disgust. "Not here. We're not running a shelter," Chad said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. No one objected. A few people looked away, but one didn't. Tasha, a young woman with frizzy hair tied back in a bandana, slipped behind the counter and scooped warm food into a to-go box. She walked over to the man and handed it to him without saying a word. Just a small nod. He smiled, teeth missing. He said nothing either. He didn't need to. From his corner table, Eliot watched it all, jaw clenched, breath unsteady, because that man wasn't just a stranger to the others. That man was him, years ago, on a cold night when his own father had called him a disgrace, when coming out meant being thrown out. Back then, no one had looked at him the way Tasha just looked at that man. She didn't see shame. She didn't see pity. She saw a person, and it broke something inside Eliot. Or maybe it healed something. He stayed until the lights dimmed and the last customer left. He wanted to see what they did when no one was watching, but that moment had already told him everything. Tomorrow, he wouldn't walk through the front door. Tomorrow, he'd enter through the back, just like the people who serve, clean, and often go unnoticed. Because Eliot Maddox hadn't just come to inspect a branch. He came to confront a past that still lived inside him, and to see if the company he built was still the kind of place he once needed it to be. And if it wasn't, he would rebuild it from the inside out. If this story moved you, follow us at Heart Story for more tales of quiet strength, unexpected kindness, and second chances that change everything. Because sometimes, the ones who seem invisible are the ones who've built the world around you. By morning, the sun had barely touched the cracked pavement behind Branch 13 when Eliot Maddox returned. This time, he didn't enter through the front. He came in through the service alley, stepping past overflowing bins and the faint scent of yesterday's cooking oil. No one glanced at him twice. No questions, no suspicion. Just another body slipping into the hum of prep time chaos. The back of house was a world of clattering pans and burnt toast edges. Steam fogged the corners of the metal countertops, and tired music leaked from someone's old phone speaker. It was here, in this quiet rhythm of overlooked labor, that Eliot began to observe. What struck him wasn't the broken equipment or dusty vents. It was the power dynamic no one had spoken of. Chad, the same server who had humiliated the elderly man the night before, moved like he owned the place. He snapped orders at dishwashers, criticized plating from the line cooks, and addressed Mara, the actual manager, as if she were a temp borrowing space. And oddly, no one corrected him. Mara was kind, clearly well-intentioned, but her voice barely carried past the clipboard in her hands. She watched problems unfold, then folded herself into silence. Her exhaustion showed not in her words, but in the way she avoided confrontation, like she had learned it never changed anything. But Eliot had seen enough, and he wasn't here to wait. By midday, he called for an all-staff meeting, something Mara hesitated at first, but couldn't refuse. The employees shuffled out front, some confused, others bored. wiping their hands on aprons as they gathered around the guest seating area. Just as Eliot was about to speak, the glass door creaked open. Everyone turned. It was the elderly man from last night. He clutched a paper bag with both hands, the crinkled top decorated with childlike doodles and a red ribbon tied with care. His eyes scanned the room until they found Tasha. He shuffled toward her with a shy grin and said nothing, just held out the bag like it was gold. Tasha opened it. Inside was a stack of homemade cookies, wrapped in wax paper and tucked beside a handwritten note that simply read, "Thank you for seeing me." The room fell quiet. Chad broke the silence. "What is this? A soup kitchen now?" His tone oozed sarcasm. Lips curled in disgust. Eliot stepped forward. The hoodie was gone. So was the cap. He stood straight now, wearing a simple collared shirt and dark slacks. Not a uniform, not a disguise. Just enough truth to be seen clearly. "My name," he said calmly, "is Eliot Maddox. I own this company." The silence turned sharp. Chad's face drained of color. Mara's clipboard slipped slightly in her grip. A few jaws dropped. One of the dishwashers whispered something in disbelief. Eliot looked around, his voice steady. "I watched, I listened, and now I know exactly what needs to change." In that moment, no one dared speak, not even Chad. Eliot wasn't angry. He wasn't here to humiliate. He was here to shift something deeper than policy. He was here to reclaim the soul of the place he once built out of hope, and apparently, fear had taken root in its absence. He turned to the elderly man and nodded with quiet reverence. Then to Tasha, whose hand still trembled slightly. "You," he said, "reminded me what this place was supposed to be." There was no applause, no grand music. Just a pause long enough for everyone to feel it in their chest, the weight of dignity, of being seen, of knowing someone cared enough to look beneath the apron. Later that day, some employees would whisper about how strange it was to see a CEO show up unannounced. But Eliot didn't need them to understand everything. He just needed them to start noticing what mattered. Sometimes, leadership isn't about being louder. It's about showing up where no one expects you and reminding others that the smallest kindness can echo further than any order ever will. The fallout was quiet. Not the kind that leaves broken plates or slammed doors, but the kind that rearranges the air in a room. After Eliot Maddox revealed who he truly was, no one moved the same. The kitchen ran softer. The chatter lowered. Even the music paused between songs, like the building itself was listening. Later that afternoon, Chad was called into the office. Eliot didn't raise his voice. He didn't throw accusations or dig through paperwork. He simply looked the man in the eye and said the words that mattered. "You didn't break a rule. You broke the spirit of what we stand for." The dismissal wasn't about compliance. It was about culture. Chad left without arguing, without a word, really. And Eliot knew that his silence spoke volumes more than any defense he could give. Because in the end, cruelty often hides behind policy until it's forced to look itself in the mirror. Eliot stepped out from the office and gathered the team again, this time not for a correction, but for a redirection. Tasha stood to one side, unsure whether to meet his gaze. He walked toward her and offered a simple, undeniable gesture. He handed her a pin, the same kind worn by senior staff, a small token, but with deep weight. "You've been acting like a leader," Eliot said. "Now you'll be trained as one." She blinked in disbelief. Her hands trembled slightly again, but not from fear this time, from something more fragile. Hope? In the corner, Luis watched from behind the kitchen's swinging door. He was tall, broad-shouldered, but carried himself like someone afraid of taking up too much space. A white bandage peeked from under his sleeve as he stirred a pot of thick chowder. Eliot noticed the stiffness in his arm. A fresh injury. Clearly, he approached quietly. Luis flinched when Eliot asked about the bandage. He mumbled that he slipped on loading stock, but insisted it was fine. Eliot listened, then looked deeper. Not at the wound, but at the fear behind the explanation. "You're not going to lose your job for getting hurt," Eliot said, voice steady. Luis didn't respond, just nodded once and turned back to the stove. But in that nod was something unspoken, a breath he hadn't allowed himself in weeks. By the next schedule rotation, Luis was reassigned to cold prep lighter tasks, fewer hazards, and a longer recovery window. No ceremony, just quiet, intentional care. Eliot didn't announce it. He didn't need to. Change wasn't about speeches. It was about what people did when no one was looking. Later that evening, a woman walked in with 2 small children and a handful of coins. She apologized before she even approached the counter, explaining she was short for the combo meal. Tasha didn't blink. She slid a warm plate across the counter and simply smiled. No fuss, no guilt, just grace. The team didn't react. No one whispered, because something subtle but profound had already shifted. Kindness had become the standard. And not just because Eliot was watching. It was because someone finally had the courage to name what wasn't right and then replace it with something better. Culture, Eliot thought, is not built in manuals or memos. It's built in how people are treated when they have nothing to offer back. That night, as the lights dimmed and the staff cleaned up in soft conversation, Eliot stood by the window. He looked out at the street he once walked as a scared teenager, alone, uncertain, and unseen. And he realized that the most powerful change doesn't come from correcting people. It comes from showing them who they're capable of becoming. The next morning, the store opened under new light. There was no announcement, no streamers, no corporate visit, but the energy had shifted. You could feel it in the way the staff moved, less tense, more present. Eliot arrived before opening, taking a quiet seat near the prep counter, watching more than he spoke. Mara was already there, clipboard in hand, sleeves rolled up. She greeted him with a nod that lingered a second too long. He returned it, but said nothing yet. They worked side by side through the early hours, reviewing inventory, observing workflows, monitoring transitions between shifts. On paper, everything appeared to run smoothly. But Eliot wasn't there for checklists. It wasn't until after lunch that the conversation came. Mara lingered by the storage room, flipping through notes that didn't need reviewing. Eliot approached gently, sensing the hesitation in her stance. "I remember something," he said calmly, "about a staff meeting last year. Chad said something about the sensitive CEO upstairs." And no one challenged him. Mara didn't deny it. She stared down at her clipboard, then closed it with a soft sigh. "I didn't want to stir the pot," she admitted, "and I didn't know how far his words would go." Eliot listened without judgment. "That's the thing," he said. "Silence can feel safe in the moment, but over time, it creates space for harm to grow." Mara didn't flinch. She didn't justify. She just nodded slowly, deeply, the kind of nod that carries regret, but also readiness. "I want to fix this," she said, "but I don't know where to begin." Eliot leaned against the counter. "We begin by recognizing who's already doing the work," he said. "Tasha didn't wait for permission to show dignity. Luis hasn't asked for anything, but he still shows up with grace." She looked at him, eyebrows raised slightly. "You want me to promote them?" "No," Eliot said, gently. "I want you to build around them." He explained what would come next, not a hiring freeze, not a reshuffling, but a cultural reset, a slow grooming from within, not just for efficiency, but for heart. Those who led with compassion, who understood the weight of unseen labor, would be the ones elevated. Titles would come second, character first. As they stood together, sunlight streamed through the windows, catching on a stack of printed menus beside the register. Eliot's gaze drifted for a moment, unfocused, caught in memory. "I was 16, he said quietly. "When my father found out I was gay, he didn't yell, he didn't argue, he just packed my bag, put it on the porch, and locked the door." Mara didn't respond. She didn't need to. Eliot continued. "I spent that night in the back alley of a diner, hoping for a warm plate. Not love, not kindness, well, just something to make the hunger stop." He paused. That diner would one day become the first harvest table. Mara blinked, stunned. "You built this company after that?" "No," he said. "I built it because of that." He looked around the room. The floors were scuffed, the walls chipped in places, but to Eliot, it had never looked more full of promise. "This place," he said, "wasn't born from profit margins or scalable models. It was born from knowing what it feels like to be invisible and deciding that no one who walks through our doors should ever feel that again." Mara stepped closer. "I'll rebuild it right," she said. "But not just the numbers. The people." Eliot smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the lips but softens the whole body. "Sometimes leadership is about systems, and But more often, it's about stories. And sometimes the most broken stories, when given light, become the very foundation that holds everything else together. By nightfall, Branch 13 had changed, though the signage still flickered, though the walls still bore the same faded paint. There was something softer in the way it breathed. A rhythm had returned, one not driven by routine or urgency, but by the small, quiet pride of people who knew their work mattered. Eliot stood near the register, ready to leave, jacket folded neatly over one arm. The hum of the kitchen played like background music, the kind only those who'd worked long shifts could recognize. It wasn't noisy, it was alive. He'd come with the weight of memory on his back, unsure if the place he once built could still carry the kind of hope it was born from. And now, it could. He turned to go, but just as his hand reached for the door, someone called his name, not loudly, not urgently, just his name, softly enough to make him stop. Luis approached, still wearing his apron, flour dusting one sleeve. His expression wasn't nervous. It was searching. In his hand, he held something folded, weathered, creased from time and sweat. "A friend asked me to give this to someone who might remember," he said. Luis held it out. Eliot took it gently, unfolding the edges. The ink was faded, the handwriting uneven, clearly written by someone much younger, but the words struck with unmistakable force. "To the guy who gave me a warm plate when I had nowhere to go. You said someday you'll pay it forward. Today I did, and I will again." Luis Eliot's fingers froze on the paper. He remembered now. Years ago, before the boardrooms, before the executive titles, he had worked late shifts scrubbing dishes in the very first harvest table, and one night, a small boy with hollow cheeks had wandered in, asking if he could sweep the floors for food. Eliot hadn't let him. He just handed him a plate and said no one should earn the right to eat. "That's already yours." Now that boy stood before him, not small anymore, not hollow but steady, whole. "I was the kid from Branch 8, Luis said, his voice low but clear. "And you were the first person who told me being gay didn't make me less worthy. I never forgot that." Eliot didn't speak. He didn't need to. He stepped forward and pulled Luis into a quiet embrace. Not formal, not ceremonial, just the weight of shared memory, folded into a moment of peace. In that instant, Eliot knew this wasn't about a restaurant or a promotion or even redemption. This was a circle, finally closed. Outside, the air had cooled. The neon sign that once blinked with fatigue now glowed steady. As Eliot stepped toward the parking lot, he turned back one last time. Through the window, he could see Luis giving instructions to a small team, their hands full with containers of warm food. It was the beginning of the free dinner rotation, something Eliot hadn't requested, but someone had started anyway. Tasha stood by the entrance, writing on a chalkboard with a piece of white stub. The words were simple. "If you're hungry and broke, you're still welcome here." Eliot smiled. His coat caught the light, revealing the small rainbow pin near his collarbone. He didn't reach up to hide it. He didn't bow his head. This time, he walked with it visible, with purpose, with pride. Not because he was a CEO, not because he had survived what tried to break him, but because he had never let this world turn his heart cold. And maybe that was the real legacy he left behind. Not a business, not a brand, but a reminder that dignity isn't given by status. It's something we extend over and over, when no one's keeping score. Now ask yourself, when was the last time you made someone feel seen? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to follow Heart Story for more real, powerful stories like this one.